This is the San Francisco 49ers Report by Chat Sports. Chase Sr. here with you. No matter where you are, how you're tuned in, I appreciate you for making today's show a part of your day. And what we're going to get into, up on the channel, I already put up a 20-minute preview of Niners Vikings on Sunday, NFL Week 2. I think it's one of the top games on the calendar. But on today's show, a different spin for this matchup. I'm going to explain how San Francisco can destroy the Minnesota Vikings and work on some of the weaknesses that we saw on tape from their loss last year in Minneapolis. And my take going into this game, it's one of the top matchups in Week 2, and you might hear that and say, well, Chase, Sam Darnold is the Vikings quarterback. How are you going to say that? For people who love ball, this is a fascinating matchup for a couple of reasons that we're going to outline here on today's San Francisco 49ers Report. And let's begin with the offensive versus defensive matchup. Niners offense, Vikings defense. Kyle Shanahan, head coach for San Francisco, is one of the top offensive minds in football. And when you go to the other sideline for Minnesota under head coach Kevin O'Connell, I thought he made a great hire in bringing in Brian Flores as the team's defensive coordinator when Kevin O'Connell took the job a few years ago. And obviously Brian Flores, his head coaching stint with the Miami Dolphins didn't work out. Well, that became a little bit of a controversy a couple of weeks ago, and Tua Tagovailoa ripped Brian Flores and said, when you come into work every single day and you're being told that you suck, it's hard to play well. Kind of an old school, new school approach. Brian Flores is of the Bill Belichick tree. What's interesting is that when he was the head coach of the Miami Dolphins, they actually won a lot of football games. Defense is his specialty. So too was Bill Belichick's specialty when he was a head coach, and you can see some of the wrinkles of the Belichick defensive mind being implemented in the approach to defense for defensive coordinator Brian Flores. And this game is for you on Sunday if you are a football nerd who loves diving in to the X's and O's. A look back at last year's tilt between the Niners and Minnesota. Of course, both teams have changed from last year, but Kyle Shanahan is still calling plays and designing the offense for the Niners, and Brian Flores is doing the same for the Minnesota Vikings on the defensive side of the football. The Niners lost that game 22-17, and they had a lot of self-inflicted wounds throughout that ball game. On the first drive, after Kirk Cousins got picked off on a great play by Charvarius Ward, Christian McCaffrey fumbled as the Niners were matriculating downfield at the Vikings' 15-yard line. It took points off of the scoreboard for the Niners. And then later, Jake Moody missed a field goal in prime time. And then before half, former Niners defensive coordinator Steve Wilks called an all-out blitz. Very bold choice when there was barely any time left, no safety help, and the Vikings were able to take advantage. Kirk Cousins noticed that right away, and he threw this pass to Jordan Addison, which was almost picked off by Mooney Ward. It kind of went through his hands, into the hands of Jordan Addison. He takes it to the crib for 60 yards, and Vikings fans were going wild. Momentum shift toward Minnesota. In that game, I thought Purdy struggled really for the second time as a pro. The first time being the week prior, bad weather against the Cleveland Browns, and a great defensive coordinator in Jim Schwartz, who's always had Kyle Shanahan's number. Purdy in this game against Minnesota last year threw 2 interceptions. Niners defense wasn't great. Kirk Cousins was great. 35 of 45 for 378 yards. Of note for San Francisco last year, as compared to this Week 2 matchup here in 2024, the Niners last year did not have Deebo Samuel, who the week prior got hurt early against the Cleveland Browns. And then Trent Williams did not play against Minnesota either because he was injured. And the last point here on your screen, bottom right, Brian Flores put on a masterclass, and we'll dive into that coming up here just around the corner. When you break down and you study Kyle Shanahan's offense, there are a lot of complexities, there's a lot of creativity, and it's a fun one to watch. And there's a reason why his offensive system, the fingerprints of it, are all across the NFL. Mike McDaniel to Matt LaFleur, Sean McVay, Bobby Slowick in Houston, etc., etc. It features choreographed pre-snap motion, but with that pre-snap motion which you think of in a finesse way because there's a lot of speed and a lot of movement, Kyle Shanahan does a great job of blending physicality with all of the wrinkles and window dressing. There is technique behind Kyle Shanahan's offense. They play with a lot of force, and there is a lot of creative design behind his plays. It forces the defense to look one way, and then the play goes another, or there's a motion man going one way, and you think maybe the offense is going to fake you out, but then they go toward that motion. There are so many beautiful little wrinkles within this offense, and a bunch of moving parts in misdirection causes that confusion for the defense. And when it comes down to Kyle Shanahan's play designing, what's insane is that he took the job after being the Falcons offensive coordinator in 2017 for San Francisco. That was a rebuilding year. And from 2018 through 2023, the Niners have finished number one each year in yards after the catch per completion. We've all heard the term Yak Kings for Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, Jawan Jennings, and others. But it's Kyle Shanahan who does such a great job of designing plays that allows these weapons to pick up yards after the catch because they catch the football in space. And that's why Brock Purdy's been able to thrive within this offense, because he gets the ball out on time, accurately, in rhythm, knows where to go with the football, goes the right place with the football, leading to a lot of these explosive plays. So for the Niners since 2018 to literally every year be number one in yards after catch per completion, it speaks to the brilliance of head coach Kyle Shanahan. And the Niners offense in 2023, we finally saw what it could become when you added a deep threat to it, as Brandon Ayuk really emerged as one of the top deep threat options in the NFL. San Francisco also blended that with a run-heavy approach. And since the Christian McCaffrey trade, the Niners actually throw the football at the 32nd rate in the NFL. And when you are running the ball with a success rate like the Niners did against the New York Jets in Week 1, why would you go away from that approach? Last year, the Niners averaged nearly 30 points per game. They were the number one overall offense in the National Football League. They were also number one in more analytical categories like efficiency and explosiveness. Ayuk, Kittle, McCaffrey, and Trent Williams, all pros last year in 2023 for this Niners club. But the Minnesota Vikings last year had no issues against this Niners offense when they met at US Bank Stadium in downtown Minneapolis. The 49ers in that ball game averaged 1.53 yards after contact per rush against Minnesota. That was the Niners' lowest mark of the 2023 season, according to True Media. Now, how did the Minnesota Vikings find so much success against San Francisco? What Brian Flores did was very creative from a defensive standpoint, and he can get creative with his defensive play calling like Shanahan can on the other side of the football. What Brian Flores did was he deployed a lot of six-man fronts, and he played three defensive tackles in stacking the box, and Minnesota clogged a lot of the interior gaps. And here's an example of that where you see Minnesota with their defensive line really stacking the line of scrimmage, and there you see it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 guys in the box, and then on the Niners side of the football, you see them going a little bit heavy with George Kittle to the right of Colton McKivitz, and an I-formation set with Kyle Juszczyk and Christian McCaffrey. And Christian McCaffrey in that game really struggled to get going. As part of this segment, and what we're going to get to next, how can the Niners exploit this? And I have some other keys to the game coming up for how San Francisco can fix those issues and dominate Minnesota and further exploit this Vikings team and bother Sam Darnold. All of that is coming up next. First, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you want Niners coverage every single day, I have you covered right here on the show. Anytime I'm in front of the camera, on the microphone, right here on the Niners Report, I want to give you coverage that is informative, insightful, entertaining, thought-provoking, that involves you. And hopefully so far with this show, I've been able to check those boxes. Let's check the box of paying our bills. And let's give a shout out to today's sponsor, Prize Picks, for making today's Niners Report possible. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. With over 5 million active members, it is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you have to do, the game is very easy, is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become a part of the Prize Picks community today. There's a great deal that we also want to tell you about. You sign up today, you get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Our selections that we like going into Sunday, there is also another special. Caleb Williams, more than a half passing yard every week of September. That's an automatic win. Brock Purdy, more than 1.5 passing touchdowns. I think he throws for at least 2. And then Sam Darnold, let's go with less than 227.5 passing yards against this Niners defense, which played very well against the likes of Aaron Rodgers. So pick more, pick less, pick Prize Picks today, download the app, create an account, use that code CLNS, and another reminder for that deal that we told you about just moments ago. You sign up today, you get $50 instantly when you play $5. Prize Picks, run your game. As far as the Niners game plan, going into Sunday against Minnesota. Last year in this game, as I mentioned, San Francisco didn't have Deebo Samuel and Trent Williams, and that went a long way in the Niners struggling. Now, they still had plenty of talent to win that game against an inferior opponent in the Minnesota Vikings, and they still had opportunities to win that game even without Deebo and Trent Williams. But those are 2 all-pro players, and you think about how the Niners incorporate Deebo and what the Vikings do well and some of the things that we've talked about here on the program. Having Deebo Samuel allows you to beat some of the things that the Vikings like to do, and then when the Vikings have 6 men in the box and 3 defensive tackles, having Trent Williams goes a long way in helping this offense out as far as picking up yards and scoring touchdowns, being efficient, and stopping what the Vikings are doing well on the defensive side of the football. In this game, Minnesota can try to stack the box, and I bet you that they're going to do that. Brian Flores was even asked about that this week, where he was asked, hey, since your game plan worked out so well against the Niners last year, are we going to see similar elements this year? And he said, yeah, of course, we could do some of the same things. But how about these numbers from week 1? The New York Jets stacked the box, and they tried to stop and hone in on the Niners' rushing attack. They put 8 men in the box, and Jordan Mason, among all running backs in the National Football League in week 1, faced the most 8-man boxes in the NFL. 50% of the time, he was going up against an 8-man box. That was about 5% more than the next best running back, or next closest running back, in Gus Edwards. So Minnesota could try to stack the box, but because Jordan Mason runs with such decisiveness and physicality, and he runs with that nasty streak in a downhill manner, he can run through some of those defenders regardless of how many players are in the box. And then another key here for Minnesota having 6 men along the line of scrimmage is Brock Purdy either under center or in the shotgun, taking the snap and pulling the trigger quickly on some quick hitting routes on the outside. And so if the Vikings are going to go with 6 men at the line of scrimmage and San Francisco then spreads the ball out and you're throwing some of those quick hitters and then you have some offensive linemen pulling to whatever side you're throwing the football to, and you get some good blocks from your other wide receiver counterparts or a George Kittle, that allows San Francisco to spread the field, keep the defense honest, and then pick up some chunk plays on the outside. You can also run some 3-man or 3-step drops for Brock Purdy, just finding ways to negate what the Vikings are trying to do. And we've talked a lot about the Niners offense going up against the Vikings defense throughout the show here today. Let's flip that. And now let's talk about the Niners defensive line going up against the Vikings offensive line. This is an area in which San Francisco can exploit the mismatch on Sunday and really take over the game, especially clogging up the vision line and muddying up the pocket for former Niners backup quarterback Sam Darnold. San Francisco's defensive line feasted against the New York Jets, and the Minnesota Vikings have a lot of holes along the interior of the offensive line. And as you look at the Niners' defensive line depth chart, Nick Bosa was active against New York. Leonard Floyd had a 21% pass rush win rate on 20 pass rushing snaps. He was so efficient in that game. But on Sunday, I want you to watch Javon Hargrave and Malik Collins operating at defensive tackle because they can take over this game. Why is that? This Vikings offensive line on the interior has a lot of holes. And I'm talking here specifically about center Garrett Bradbury and right guard Ed Ingram. Ed Ingram is the weak link on this Vikings offensive line. He had a 9.3 pass blocking grade against the New York Giants. Dexter Lawrence owned him in the season opener. And Dexter Lawrence was one of the few bright spots for a Giants team that looked horrendous on the offensive side of the football. But defensively, Dexter Lawrence, one of the top defensive tackles in the game, performed very well. And that 9.3 pass blocking grade is about as bad as it gets on a scale of 0 to 100. Ingram allowed 1 sack and an NFL worst 6 pressures in that game against New York. And of the 69 guards who saw the field in week 1 across the National Football League, Ingram was rated last. And when you turn on the tape from what the Niners defensive line was able to do against the Jets offensive line on Monday Night Football, Malik Collins was all over the place and he was disruptive. And Javon Hargrave is one of the better pass rushing defensive tackles in the NFL, coming off a down year when he still had 7 sacks. Garrett Bradbury, on the other hand, he earned an offensive grade of 44.8 against the New York Giants. He, too, was one of the lowest graded offensive linemen in week 1. So in this game for San Francisco, it is time for Malik Collins and Javon Hargrave to eat up. And it's different for a quarterback when there's pressure coming off the edge, because sometimes you can see that with your peripheral and you can sense it. If you're able to generate a pass rush and muddy up the pocket by bursting through the interior, the quarterback is going to feel uncomfortable right from the jump because there's really nowhere for him to move off of his spot to. And when you blurry the sight line for quarterbacks, it makes their job hard because they're not able to go through their progressions and survey the field, especially for a quarterback like Sam Darnold, who's been prone to throwing interceptions and turning the football over. And what I would also do if I was Nick Sorensen, run a lot of twists and stunts. Now, the Vikings this offseason made Christian Darrisaw one of the highest paid offensive tackles in the game. And he is one of the best offensive tackles in the game. But if you run some twists and stunts up front, where there's a lot of different direction going on with your defensive linemen, you can really match up nicely against this porous Vikings offensive line. And not only can Malik Collins and Javon Hargrave have a day, but it could open up some pass rushing lanes for Nick Bosa and Leonard Floyd. And how about the debut that Leonard Floyd had as a San Francisco 49er? He was second on the team in pressures with 4. He had the only sack of Aaron Rodgers for the Niners in that Monday Night Football game. And this is wild, right? He played only 20 pass rushing snaps against New York, and he had a pressure rate of 21.1%. So he was highly effective when he was on the field. And this is such a fun player to watch. Number 56, if you're not familiar. Last 4 years, 9+ sacks in each season. He's one of a handful of players to be able to accomplish that. He plays with a motor. He plays with speed, a relentless energy, twitch and bend off the edge. Really quality player, and probably the best edge rusher that Nick Bosa has had opposite of him since he came into the league with the Niners in 2019. If you fluster Sam Darnold, he is prone to turning the football over. And when you win the turnover battle in the National Football League, you win close to 80% of your games. That's how San Francisco can dominate Minnesota and move to 2-0. in the early portion of the 2024 season. So who you got in this game? SF for the Niners, MIN for the Minnesota Vikings. Get those predictions in. Let me know right now. And as always, thanks for supporting the movement here on the Niners Report.